So how's it going, Soo Yin?
Oh, just wonderful. And I'm so excited about this session. And I thank you for inviting me to join and speak about the Jujo Ranch.
I look forward to it. I know we started speaking a couple years ago when I reached out to your nephew.
That's true. Jack Jew Jr. started the blog, and that got our whole family involved in giving him our oral input and photographs and everything to build our family history because we realized that after our parents passed on, that our generation was the only generation that was bicultural and bilingual. And if we didn't record that, then the transnational character of our family life would be gone. And that is so important because growing up on the Jujo Ranch, it was really a microcosm of transnationalism. There were so many people who came to live and work on our ranch that were from different countries as well as us. And we also had a community of local people that came from the surrounding area. And so there was a little world that was created on this ranch that made it so special. It was very multicultural. There were Mexicans, Chinese, Japanese, Thai family, Gypsy family, um, some white workers as well. So it was just Filipino.
The German spy couple?
And the German spy couple, they lived on Desila's place, which was then a dirt wagon trail very close to us. And during World War II, they were spies for the American government. And they got a lot of information from Hitler's inner circle, and they got arrested. And they were facing a firing squad. And at the very last minute, our spy our spy organization freed them. So they were returned to California and they settled in the San Fernando Valley and became our neighbors. Very interesting couple because us children, when we walked to Havenhurst Elementary School, we would have to pass by their house there, and the kids said, "Oh, be careful, that's the spy." And we had interesting people. They were very nice. They mainly kept to themselves, but they were very nice. And then we had strays that came to our ranch, and Wino Mikey, we called him Wino Mikey because he was a World War I veteran, and he was homeless. And he worked for a season or so on the Jujo Ranch. And then he had what I would call PTSD today, but nobody knew how to label it back then and how to address it. And so he had nowhere to go, and he wouldn't leave either. And so, and he considered, this was like his home in a way. So my father said, okay, you can live on the ranch. Just don't make too much trouble, and it'll be fine. And so he lived in one of the stables, which a part of the stable in those days, the olden days, they were made into living quarters as well as having your draft animals there. And that's an old tradition in the ranch culture, in the valley. And so there were places that migrants who came to work on the ranch, they lived on the ranch, and they lived all over the place on the ranch. And it was very interesting.
And you're giving us this, this great vignette of an assortment of such
Yes, it was.
in the way that they come together. because you were right at the epicenter of it, and you grew up in that ranch. But that ranch, of course, had its origins going further back to 1919, and even further back to the 1800s. With the Chinese immigration wave that came in, which is
Yes.
where we get the transnational story. And so, for context, just to kind of better situate us, you, roughly speaking, lived at the ranch during which period of years?
Okay. I was born in 1941. And in my early years, the first or second year, then I remember living in the old cottage that Jujo built back in 1920. When when he bought the ranch with the help of his friend Otto Brandt of the California Title and Trust Company, um, he built the horse barn and the packing house first in 1919. He staked a telephone pole, which you captured in your video. I was very surprised and happy that it was still in excellent condition. 101 years old. That, that land had been in the family for 101 years old. So in 1919, he built the packing house and the horse barn. The horse barn was his original sleeping quarters. Then the following year in 1920, he built his own cabin and cottage for his wife and his two sons and two daughters. The two daughters were born here in America, and Jujo's two sons were born in China. And so I grew up for the first 2 years in that little old cottage. And it was very interesting because it was very old by that time in 1941. And we remember asparagus shoots growing in between coming up through the wooden floors. And it was very small. It was built of redwood. The walls and the walls and the roofs were made of redwood, and the floor was cement. And then during
I'll
World War,
interrupt you there for a quick second.
yes,
I get the sense that that cabin or those redwood buildings didn't completely disappear from the property, because when I was there was many pieces of redwood that were lying adjacent to the packing house.
yes, right. I think that came from the horse barn, a very big horse barn there. I understand that years back, I think in the 1970s, uh, one of my father's younger sisters, my Aunt Corrine, who originally held title to the Jujo Ranch by birthright citizenship.
Mhm.
My Jujo put the land in her name at that time. So she told my dad that they had to tear down his cabin because it was falling apart and it posed a fire danger. So that's what they did. But several years after that, I did notice that the cottage and other areas along DeSillis, the older part of the ranch, was all torn down. So what remained was the actually the heart of the operations of the asparagus ranch, and that was the packing house and the horse barn, and then the home that my father built. Excuse me.
So take us back to where I kind of interrupted you.
That's all right. That's all right. So when I was about 2 years old, 1 or 2 years old, I remember that we moved into our new home, which was so luxurious compared to our living standards at the cottage. And he built a 2-story home, and it really felt like a home. And that was my father's idea that it was now the permanent headquarters for a transnational family because we could not go back to China. And there was no hope of that. My grandfather, in his day, saw himself as a sojourner, that he was here to make the money to help support his family back in China who were suffering under the Qing dynasty. And he always meant to return to China. And even when he brought his wife and two sons over from China, he intended to bring the entire family back to China. But when in 1937 my father went back to marry my mother, he saw that the war back there was getting so bad that there was nowhere that would be safe, not even in Hong Kong. And he wanted his children to have an American education. And they were already born here and used to the custom and culture here. And so when he made money from the World War II, when he was growing a lot of asparagus, when the government needed a lot of food to support the soldiers overseas in both the European war and in Asia as well. So there were two theaters that the government had to feed, and so that's when my father was able to turn the business around because we were suffering during the Depression. It hit us hard too, and that's what saved us. But what was interesting about the big house and the way we lived in the new home that was half Chinese and half American. And there were little things like the beautiful Chinese carving on our front door that had the word "fu," which means uh, good fortune and prosperity. And he had my grandmother, who was the oldest member of our family, choose the word to bless the home. So it was quite a ritual that was followed. And so she chose that. It was a beautiful carving. And my father always told us the meaning of that and that it was a blessing for the family because this was our headquarters here now. And this is where that we would settle from now on. And the upstairs office, he had an office, and that's where he conducted all of the business with the Juzhou farming. And then downstairs, we had many people coming to visit us.
So
And they would,
I imagine he wasn't sleeping on the ground anymore at that
no,
point.
no, no, no. And we had our just about almost our own bedrooms in the beginning. You know, we paired off and shared, and we played musical chairs as each one of us grew up and left home, got married, and raised families of their own. And but I loved that ranch. It had everything there. It was very self-sufficient. We had our own gasoline pump there because it was a working farm. And so the trucks would come during harvest season and they would gas up there and bring the produce to LA City Market. And I remember playing around an old buck wagon that was right by the big horse barn. There's a picture of it in JR's blog,
Hmm.
uh, but it's very small. It was by then pretty much in bad shape, but I do remember it was a small buck wagon. And in those days, when you used it for hauling, you triple in force the back of it to be able to carry heavy loads. And the iron wheels were about 6 to 8 inches in width. They were huge, thick ones. And Jujo would hitch 4 horses from the horse barn to that buck wagon and travel 3 hours each way over the old Cahuenga Pass down to LA Plaza,
Mhm.
where the original truck market was for truck farmers. Then later they built the city market. And and then I loved going into around the packing house because that was where the action was. I had Bingo, our dog, and he knew every worker there. He knew all of them, and he would come around and say hello to them every day. And we would go by Jujo's old quarters in the barn where there was a little kitchenette, and the kitchenette is where uh, later the braceros that worked on the ranch and others would do their cooking there. And I do remember seeing Richie Valens' half sisters, little Irma, the youngest, and Connie Jr., and they were very, very young, maybe 3, 4 years old around there. But they were playing around that area by the door there. And Connie, their mother, would always give me one of her wonderful tortillas. And I never forgot the best tortillas that I ever had. And ironically, many years later, just a few years ago, um, a lady contacted me through Jack's blog that she was the daughter of one of my father's foremans on one of his ranches, the Jujo Ranch and one in Simi as well, Dick Bauk. And Dick Bauk's daughter was about my sister's age. Maybe she was 2 years older than me or whatever. But she remembered coming to the ranch many times, and she said all through her years, she has never tasted such wonderful home cooking as the Mexicans cooked on the ranch, especially the tortillas. And she's never been able to find the secret of how you make that wonderful homemade tortillas.
So yeah, and I've spoken to Sally about her cooking, and she can definitely be very extensive with her explanations of all of these secrets. Many
Yeah,
people are very much fascinated by how it is that some of these laborers pass down these culinary traditions. And so there's a whole undercurrent of cooking that I would say is trans international, with
yes,
things that would cross over, with the wok pan, for instance, from what I understand, was.
very much so. Yeah, very much so. And when I saw the demolition of the ranch
Yeah.
there, it was heart-wrenching for me when I thought about it because it was the people and the culture there that was so memorable and that was so unique and that really reflected what ranch culture was like for the San Fernando Valley. It wasn't just us on the Jujo Ranch, but for example, in my PowerPoint, I mentioned the Orchid Ranch, which still is in existence today.
Mhm.
But my dad remembers going to their fiestas on their ranch too, and they would have the wildflower fiesta. Thousands of people came because every rancher and every farmer in the valley came to that fiesta. And so it was a way of celebrating a lifestyle during that period of time that was so unique to the San Fernando Valley. And that's what made it so attractive, I think, to a lot of people that wanted to settle in the valley when the streetcars came um, with it brought a lot of people to see the valley and see what it had to offer.
And you
And
had certain infrastructural transportation networks built in around the ranch, like, you know, the Southern Pacific. You had, that interconnecting, you know, farm to market road. You had the, like you mentioned, the Pacific Electric that was brought in. Uh,
yes,
so that's really what connects, right, the Jujo Ranch and the asparagus to a greater context, which sadly the farm labor in the packing house made mention to with regards to World War II and the, like you're saying, the Pacific and also the European theater of war during the 1940s.
yes, right. There was a call out uh, uh, to farmers in the San Fernando Valley during the war to step up food production. So everyone got into it, and then also they introduced the Bracero program to help the farmers out because many of the, well, all the men um, left the farms to fight in the war, and so farmers needed um, uh, more help, and that's how we got the Bracero program. And Van Owen Street was the only east-west road that ran the entire length of the San Fernando Valley from one end to the other. And so there was a lady, the only lady that I know of so far, there might have been others, but a neighbor of ours, Margaret Farlow, who had a lettuce ranch on Van Owen and Haskell, she campaigned to have Van Owen Street paved. And it was just a little dirt wagon trail, and it was paved into a very narrow 2-lane road, but it was enough for all the farmers to make use of and the ranchers to make use of in the valley to get their cargo out to Los Angeles and off to the war effort. And so that's how it was done. And we had several trucks and several drivers on the ranch that also during harvest season would truck crates and crates to it. We had a Filipino driver, a very lovely man, Benny Cam, and he was our long haul driver who trucked the asparagus up through the Pacific Northwest, and he drove through Colorado and Utah and all that to deliver to all the supermarkets around there. Then we had much bigger trucks that were on the Jujo Ranch that trucked mainly to the downtown LA City market where refrigerator railroad cars would come and then carry the load all the way across the US to back east and then to Europe. And the Jujo Ranch had done business for many years with Safeways since the 1920s and Ralph's grocery store chain in the maybe in the late 20s, early 30s or so. And then John Nixon Company, whom I remember in New York, he was the largest distributor of produce up and down the East Coast, as well as to Europe. And we shipped to him regularly for all those years until in 1956, the business closed down. But we had those long time business associates that were a part of the whole uh, social network, as you were mentioning, because it wasn't just a business, but there were social relationships that developed uh, with our extended family and with the families that worked on the ranch and with the business associates, transportation, everything. So it was all so interconnected.
What an incredible set of accomplishments for a young immigrant boy who then comes about meeting, a certain person by happenstance, and despite not being able to become a U.S. citizen, is able to acquire as much land as he does. He's relatively illiterate. As far as I understand, he didn't even was able to read or write English or Chinese for that matter, but he can definitely figure things out. And going back to the very short little story that you were kind of giving a glimpse of, he would meet business people in his barn where effectively was a home, to then having this much bigger home built, going into the 1940s. Here is the asparagus king. There's a there's
Yes.
there's quite an interesting uh, story there.
Yes, he had such a drive to succeed because he knew such poverty in China during that time. He knew starvation, and he knew that he could not read or write. So, what future was there for him? But that wasn't going to let him down. And he had heard about Gold Mountain, and that in California, there was opportunity, and the Civil War had just ended 9 years earlier when he came in 1874. So he got a job as a cabin boy on a four-mast sailing vessel in order to get over to San Francisco. And he worked as a cabin boy for first-class passengers. So he learned how to relate to Westerners a little bit on that trip, and it was a 3 month, almost a 3 month trip. He carried only 16 pounds of rice with him, and by the time he landed in San Francisco, he had only like half a pound or so. And what he did is he went to the Chinese Six Companies in San Francisco, which was a benevolent association comprised of several members of several villages around where my grandfather had his ancestral village, and they helped each other out because discrimination was still pretty rampant in this country against Asians. And so they kind of had their own community in the way they helped each other out. And so my grandfather got a job in the vineyards as a migrant in Marysville and St. Helena. And then after that, he worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad, doing hard labor on the tracks for the San Luis Obispo line. And he was trying to make his way down to LA because he had heard that that was where the opportunity was. And story goes, I don't know if this is true or not, but he met Otto Brandt when they were both hoboing down through the Mojave Desert. And they became fast friends because they both had great dreams. And Brandt became Jujo's mentor because he taught Jujo everything that Jujo learned about American business. And he taught him that if you want to start a business of your own and you don't have any money, that's okay in America. What you do is you borrow from a bank or you borrow from friends or whatever, and you use that borrowed money and you put your ideas and innovation into work. And when you are successful, you pay back that money, you use that money, put a little aside, and you send some home to your family in the old country, but whatever you have left over, you put back into your business. And the next season, you go and borrow again for the next season's harvest. And that's how you build up. And he learned from Otto Brandt that land was a more stable investment than the stock market. At the time, stock market crashes, it comes and goes and all, but land is always there. And so my grandfather always felt that the good earth, just as the Chinese think of the good earth in China, it was the same here in this country. And so land was his focus. And he was always uh, farming and buying more land and buying more land because he felt he wanted to have enough of a legacy to leave his descendants so that they would never have to suffer the starvation and poverty that he had to undergo, and that they would all get an American education because he knew that eluded him in his lifetime. He would never have the chance to do that. And the same thing with my father, too. My, I've always observed when you have three generations of family that are transnational, the older generation, they stay within their old country's culture. They bring those values with them and they plant them in their new host country, and they live by that the values of that culture. The youngest generation, who most of them are born here or they're young enough to assimilate, they assimilate easily into the American culture as far as their language, their culture, their socialization. So they are happy with, and they enjoy the benefits that America has to offer. But it's the middle generation in my father and his brother's generation. They suffer because they cannot enjoy the true benefits of the new country. They are constantly in conflict with the push-pull factors within themselves. How much of the old country do they retain and teach to their children here? And how much do they adopt to the American values and systems? And they know that their children are going to assimilate so much easier. So anyway, make a long story short, my father gave up any college education. He graduated from Van Nuys High School. And he gave that up at the time because my grandfather was getting very old and not in the greatest health. And he was the surviving son now, so he was taking over. And so he gave that up to send his sisters to good colleges, one to SC and John Hopkins University, and the other to UCLA. And then our kids, our siblings, we had college educations. And that's something that both my grandfather Jujo and my father Santong valued very much in the family.
Yeah, I've heard many illustrations of the kinds of good deeds that he did, um, which I find very inspiring, given the fact that he was people that I've spoken to that knew him. They found him to be quite charitable with
You
both.
talk, yeah. Are you talking about my father or my grandfather?
I'm
My,
referring to your grandfather, but I think it comes
okay.
down to your father, and I can see that being the case even with Jack and yourself, in the sense that you really find a way to reach out to others and embrace others like myself. So I can definitely see that being as a type of tradition that's being
Well, you're
passed.
part of the family now.
Well, thank you.
This is, we have a large extended family here. But yes, there was a white migrant worker named Oliver. I don't know his last name or whatever, but he stands out in family um, uh, history because he came to my grandfather's ranch as a migrant working in the asparagus fields, and my grandfather was puzzled. He knew that this boy was very different, and he was very studious. He was a hard worker, but at night he would be um, sitting on a sack of potatoes and stuff in the barn and reading books. And my grandfather asked him, Oliver, what you read? And Oliver said, law books, that his dream was to make enough money to go to law school. And my grandfather, being totally, well, illiterate, he could just barely write his name and a few things. But like you said, he had everything in his mind. He did everything by association and had a photographic memory. And it was developed to a higher degree because he could not read or write. So he said, Oliver, you good boy, you smart boy, you go to school and I pay for your law school. And he did. And Oliver graduated at the top of his class. He ended up marrying the daughter of the co-founder of California Bank. And the daughter was the only child, so Oliver ran the bank. And so in later years, Jujo, following what he learned from Otto Brandt, went to California Bank to borrow money for the next harvest season. And he couldn't do any banking, open bank accounts and this and that because he couldn't write. And so he would give to Oliver the entire profit loss statement, everything in his mind. He would have it all laid out for Oliver verbally. And of course, Oliver trusted him and he gave him a blank check. You know, anything he needed, he gave it to him because he knew that Jujo's handshake was as good as a contract. And so at the end of the season, Jujo made money. He would pay back his loan. And that's how the business grew.
So let's finish off with a few things. Your favorite memory, your personal fondest memory at the ranch. Another one would be, would you be willing to share a little bit more about Ramon, which, of course, was Connie Valenzuela's
Oh, yes.
boyfriend? Can you just share with us some dramatic moments that you might have remembered of him? And then also a story of Richie Valens.
Okay, sure. Sure. I think my fondest memory was hanging out with uh, with the workers at the packing house and running around with my dog. I was kind of considered a stray on the ranch because I was so little, and I always liked to go off on my own to go exploring here and there. And so I liked listening to the language, all the different languages. I heard mainly Spanish, but there was Filipino, Tagalog, and there were other languages spoken too. But there was always music, chatter, and laughter. And I enjoyed seeing all the activity. And there was a girl I remember, Florence, and my sisters and I still remember her today. But she loved to dance and she loved to sing, and she was a beautiful young gal. And she used to come over to the big house and she would teach my sister and I Mexican folk dances. And she would sing and dance, and we had like a little party. And I love those moments. And I love excuse me, the peaceful times we had. When when the operation closed for the day, then my father allowed us to go out into the packing house and play all around there during working days. Excuse me.
Yeah.
During working hours, we couldn't. And he even had a stop sign right there to tell us when to stop, and
Hmm.
that we can go beyond there. But anyway, yeah. Then we used to go to the packing house and we take those field boxes, and there were roller tracks from one end of the barn to the other, because you put the asparagus boxes and you roll them down and stack them. So, me being the youngest, my older siblings would put me in the field box, and we would play roller coaster and push me all the way across the packing house. And everything, because it was World War II, materials like metal was very hard to find. You were rationed for that. So there was a lot of plywood and homemade machinery and stuff. And that was made by the braceros and the workers on the ranch. They created a lot of these the tools and things. My father would design certain machinery and stuff, and they would make it right there. So anyway, yeah, that's what I enjoy doing. And another time is in the evenings when it was summertime. It was so peaceful and quiet. We would go to sit by the swimming pool and the bathhouse there and just enjoy just a peaceful uh, evening. You see the sun set over rows and rows of fields as far as your eye could see, because other families had their ranches too, and everything was flat and open. You'd hear a coyote cry once in a while in the air, through the air. And you would just sit there and have this peaceful moment. And our swimming pool was unusually large because when my father built it, because the earth, the soil on the ranch is sandy loam and highly porous, that each time they were building, digging, it kept caving in. And so the pool got bigger and bigger. And by the time they finally were able to cement the whole pool, when you filled it up, it looked like a small lagoon.
Hmm.
It was beautiful. And when you have the underlight waters, the underlighting, lighting up the pool at night, it was gorgeous. I like that. But there were interesting, fun moments. I remember Connie Valenzuela and Ramon. Ramon was a bracero, so he ended up living in Jujo's old original sleeping quarters in the barn, and it was right across from the packing house, right there. And he was a very good worker and very gentle type of personality. And he had been with the family for a long, long time, many, many years that we trusted him. He became part of our family. And then, and Connie too, she worked in the packing house and she did the sorting and grading. And how the packing house worked, and my sister had told me, which I wrote to you and gave you, that the women did all the sorting and grading of the asparagus. The men did the heavy work there, but because Ramon was a bracero and we had many workers who who had their visas either expired or they were legally allowed to be here, but they just didn't have their ID cards on them at the time. And we had mass deportations that I experienced on our ranch, and it was quite dramatic. The one I remember is the Operation Wetback in 1954. It had happened under Operation Repatriation in the 1930s during the Depression years on the ranch as well. But I do remember the one in 1954 and 55. And they came in through the DeSilla side gate, which was a dirt wagon trail at that time. And they had paddy wagons and the U.S. Marshals, and they leaped out with their billy clubs and they ran for the packing house. And you'd see everybody flying out of the windows, the doors, and some of them ran down to the fields, and some of them ran to Bull Creek Wash to hide. And dear Ramon, he always came to our family because he was part of the family. And he came to our house and in our kitchen family room, which you took a photograph of the outside of in your video, that very corner was inside was a bathroom where Ramon used to hide. And so the immigration, they must have the visa numbers of all the people that worked in the valley, and they knew when to raid. So it was always the beginning of harvest season on the Jujo Ranch that they would come and hit us. But it happened to other ranchers in the valley and to factory workers too, because braceros worked not only on farms and ranches, but for the railroads too, and factories. Then Richie Valens is Connie's son, second son. He was about 9 years old or so, 10 years old when he came to the ranch. He lived with his father, Joseph Valenzuela, who was a musician, I understand, was a musician, very gifted in music. He lived with him until the father was very ill and couldn't take care of him, and he was dying or he died. And he came to the ranch to live with Connie and Ramon. And by that time, there was little Connie Jr. and Irma, his two half-sisters. So he was always making music and singing on the ranch. He inherited the gift from his father, and he would take sticks and drum on the asparagus field boxes, and he taught himself how to drum, and he had a natural sense of rhythm, and he was always singing, but he was always a very curious and a mischievous child. So he was getting into everything, and we had this huge beehive on the ranch near the packing house.
Mm-hmm.
Had been there for 3 generations, Jujo's time, my father's time, and then our time. And there were thousands of bees in that hive. So Richie thought it was fun. He took a huge rock and he threw it at the beehive and knocked it over. And swarms of bees. They were very territorial on that ranch. And they attacked everybody and every living creature. Even the horses got stung, and the dogs and the cats and the people. And everybody ran into the pool and jumped into the pool. And some of the workers did that, and some of them went out to the irrigation ditches. And we were quarantined in the house for 3 days. And my father had to shut down all farming operations for 3 days until the bees settled down. So that's the story I remember about him. And then we had a ranch up in Saugus as well. And so the workers on the Jujo Ranch in Van Nuys were also transported to the Saugus Ranch to work. So it was back and forth. Some lived there too.
Yeah, I think the Sally interview that I also did, Sally Ferrer Gonzalez,
Yes.
one of the packing house workers, she shares some stories that more or less converge with yours, where she mentions her family having been a family of mariachis, and
Oh, yes.
she has this. She believes on her end that Richie was inspired to become a musician because of her family. So I see both.
Mariachi, yes.
Yeah, I see both these strands of inspiration. Both from his father's side as well as very much potentially from Sally's family is having all kind of imbued his musical talent, as well as the asparagus crates. Apparently, as you mentioned, these are very much unknown stories of that transpire at the Jujo Ranch.
Yes, right. And then I also remember Jesus. Everyone remembers him. I don't know if Sally mentioned Jesus to you.
Yes, well,
He
is
did.
Jesus the same Jesus that she married?
No, there was he's a different Jesus. Jesus that I was talking about uh, was a Mayan Indian, not Mexican, but Mayan from Chiapas, Mexico.
Yeah, Mexico stole half of Guatemala's land and then made
Ah,
it
yes.
Mexico, and that's
Oh, okay. So there's a history about that too.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. So he he lived for a while on the Jujo Ranch, and he actually lived. Uh, and my sisters just told me the other day. He actually lived in the horse stable, living quarters in the pasture where Wino Mikey
Mm,
came to live later. But then later he moved to the Saugus Ranch. He got married and he had a nice little adobe cottage there. And he was very artistic. He was our blacksmith. And he created, he was always working on the anvil in the tool shed. And he was creating these machinery and equipment. But come fiesta time, oh, he made the most beautiful piñatas for everybody. And he was so spiritual, you could feel it. And people and animals gravitated to him because he was so spiritual. It's just something about him. And he tamed two wild coyotes.
mm.
I mean, wild coyotes, yeah.
I can't even
They
tame my own dog.
yeah, they trusted him. And you'd see him walking across the ranch out there, and two little wild coyotes be following him, around. But you couldn't approach the coyotes because they were still wild. Uh, my sister and I were never allowed to go near the coyotes when we went to Saugus Ranch.
Mhm.
By that time, Jesus was living there, but and working there. But my older brother Guy was able to go there because he loved animals, and they sensed that, and so he could go, see them. But there were interesting characters there, and a lot of people. Shorty was another uh, man who worked for three generations, started in Jujo's time, and then with my father, and then with my older brother Jack. And he's the one that gave us bingo, and he won bingo at, oh, excuse me, not that, don't worry about the pun, but it's Ortega's Bar on DeSilla's Place. It was a wonderful hangout. I understand that's where a lot of workers ended up. And they had bingo nights.
Ah,
And he won
that
this.
kind of bar.
I don't know. I don't know. I just heard, Ortega's Bar. Let's go meet at Ortega's Bar, afterwards and all that. So he won this puppy, and he gave us bingo, and bingo was the best guard dog we ever had. And he knew his ropes, and like I said, he knew all the people there. The only one that that hated the dog was the milkman.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because he had the tattoos on his leg to
Well, it's like
show
the
for.
mail delivery people now. They get barked at.
Yeah, right. But
We're gonna try to finish up soon. What I'm actually curious, what milk do you remember which manufacturer, which dairy farm your family purchased their milk from?
Yes, Ador.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Ador, Ador Farms, yeah.
Hmm.
They came around regularly to all the ranches in the valley. And I believe their dairy farm was in somewhere Encino somewhere or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah, in Ventura somewhere.
Yeah, they were the, excuse me, they were the first uh, to service the valley area as far as milk delivery.
Yeah.
Before then, delivery was, excuse me, by dog cart.
Mm.
They went around. But yeah, in the 1920s, Ador started. And so I remember the Ador man would always come and bring the milk bottles, and then you finish up, you put your empty bottles in that wire basket,
Hmm.
and he'd take that back. And then we had a fish man come around. He was a Japanese fisherman,
Mm.
and he had his own little green truck, a refrigerator, and he would bring his fresh catch, and he'd drive all around the valley to the different ranches. They also did in LA too.
Yeah.
And he would open up his truck, so like a food truck. And you go out and you pick out the fresh fish that you wanted. So, they have that, yeah. Then
Yeah. Those
later on, oh, when we were growing up, of course, it was the Good Humor ice cream truck.
mm, that
Much later,
must have been good.
yeah, it was.
Well, these are all very good stories. I think you really expressed them well, and they're really going to stand out. I think at the point at which we redo that presentation with that great PowerPoint with all that informative details that you have provided. I think we have so much to work with here, so I really
Thank
do
you.
appreciate it. All of your hard labor of love that you've been able to put into these great presentations, the PowerPoint, and, as we continue to build on this arsenal of various facts, we get to put the stories of those behind them, get to hear your
Right.
vantage point. We get to hear Sally. We get a PhD student in Hongyan, you know, your nephew Jack, and we really get the full picture. I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate that um, you are the person to bring this all about, to put it, bring us all together like this and get it, because that's what that's what really is the true story about ranch culture in the valley during the agricultural period of time. And the people, every generation has different stories to tell, and ours is only one part of the whole story of the San Fernando Valley. But it's the people, and it's the memories, and it's the things, the untold stories behind the scene. And that's what I think hit me. I mean, I knew that sooner or later there would be demolition, and it wasn't, those buildings weren't going to last there forever. But still, it took me a while to process it. And I still feel it now too, processing the loss of it. But it really wasn't a loss, because what we have that we're bringing together, and you're bringing it out from all of us, that is the true essence of what life was meaningful for all of us. That was the true essence, of the the soul of the valley. So I thank you for your efforts too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And closing thoughts would be just to continue to express my gratitude and to continue to foster this for the future. I know we're not finished. This is one of many additional projects we're going to put together. So thank you so much for all of that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Frankie. It's an honor and a joy for me too.